next up we will have Marcel Fachon. All right, our next speaker is Marcel Fachon, who's a professor at Stanford University, and he's going to be telling us about keeping up appearances. So take it away, Marcel.
Thanks. This is joint work with Pascaline and Laura, and I should tell you that it's ultimately the original inspiration for this is my own maternal grandmother. I think her favorite phrase when you were getting out and didn't like the way you looked, she would say, "What would people think?" Well, there we are, keeping up appearances. And I have lots of different experimental results to show you, so I'm not going to spend too much time discussing the literature, but especially in front of this crowd, we know that people care about their relative standing. We know that relative rank, I can't see the thing here, but we know that relative rank concerns have long been hypothesized to affect economic behavior, so we have literature on that. And of course, it goes all the way back to Veblen and Duesenberry, who talked about conspicuous consumption. This also observed some renewed interest in that for those considerations in the literature, and is also a recent behavioral economics literature that revisits these themes through self-image and social image consideration. A lot of this literature that the Veblen and Duesenberry are interested in the leisure class, the rich people, and they're spending on these lavish things, consumption. Because we're going to be looking at poor people, like my grandmother was. And for those people, they also have anecdotal evidence, especially from my family, but never mind. Also from talking to people in different places in Africa and India and so on, that the appearance of poverty can attract scorn, ridicule, discrimination, and often even moral condemnation, because people think you're lazy, there must be something wrong with you. And so, if you talk about, it looks to me that the poor care a lot about respect. Are people respecting me? And that, which of course might influence their own self-respect. And therefore, keeping up appearances may be a way of gaining this respect. And so that's the idea. In fact, the English language has it, even calls it to look respectable. Right? So you want to look the part. And in fact, this can even be this idea of looking respectable. Living in England, I learned about dress code. The Brits are frantic about dress codes. They have all these different layers of dress code, all the way from going to the Royal Ascot Derby or the Henley Thames rowing competition on the Thames. You have to dress the part, especially with a little hat and everything. All the way to job interviews, you need to wear a tie, obviously. And supermarket, where in England they would remind you that you're not supposed to go to the supermarket in your pajamas. There was a dress code for the supermarket, and also for moms bringing their kids to school. And so dress code is one. It's important because you can see the different layers, different signals. You want to go to Royal Ascot, you're really, really rich. Therefore, it's going to be very expensive. You want to go to the supermarket, just buy some hoodie and get done. So that's the idea. So what are we going to do in this paper? We take these ideas to Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, and we're going to be asking two questions. And so there are basically two main parts in the paper. Are individuals who appear poor more likely to be victimized? Do they think that? And does this, if they do, does this generate incentives for them to distort their behavior or their consumption in order to manipulate their perceived rank? They're going to try to look higher socioeconomic status than they actually are. And of course, these matter for policy, the ways that you can, this I'm sure. The sampling frame is Greater Abidjan, so it may not look like that to you, but this is a photograph of the kind of a view, a map of Abidjan. Abidjan has got lots of lagoons, so it's basically like broken into many different pieces, and the blue parts are where the sample is. So basically, it's like 100 kilometers across. So you can see we cover about 40 kilometers vertically. So we can see we cover a large area, but we do not cover the rich downtown area of Abidjan. We just focus on these poorer suburban areas. The experimental design includes lots of different pieces. There are things that are experiments embedded in the survey itself. So we have a large survey of about 2,000 plus people that we conducted in 2020, in fact, just before the plague. And then we repeated a second wave where we embedded in the survey experiment various type of experiments. There's a raffle choice. So basically, people are told, well, we're going to reward you for participating, but you have to choose, and you're going to win $60, something like that. But you have to tell us now what you will want in case you win. And there's a basic good basket of basic goods. There's a basket of luxury goods, and there's charitable contributions. Charitable contributions, because that's the ultimate signal, because it's completely useless to you. The only thing that is useful for is to help either your self-image or your social image. There are some vignette experiments in the sense that the type of information people see in the survey questions will vary, and we can use that for identification. There's a photograph choice. So basically, people are, as everybody at the end of the interview, we ask them, would you like us to take your photograph? About half of them agree to that. And then we say, we may want to come back and take a better one. If you want to, later today or tomorrow. And some people do that. And then within that choice, some of them we tell them, oh, by the way, we're going to use this photograph to select people for a documentary. So there's kind of an incentive to look better. And there's also a documentary. You can also choose, would you like to appear in a documentary Voices of the Poor or Voices of the Mighty, or Voices of or Abidjan, Land of Opportunity, something like that, which is clearly not the same kind of context. We have, after the survey was done, we did lab experiments. There's what we call a mini job. I think this is basically people are invited to apply to do a half-a-day job, which is actually quite well paid. We also ask them, oh, by the way, when you come, would you like to have a meal or a pen? Same value, $5, I think. It's an expensive pen. It's like a Stanford pen or something. Mm-hmm. So it's really futile to like that. And then sometimes we just, that's it. And sometimes we say, oh, by the way, we kind of let them to believe that actually the selection committee will actually see that choice. Okay? And we see whether they react to that. There's also enumerators who screen some of the applicants to the documentary based on the photograph, on the two photographs that they have. The first photograph that we took and the second photograph that they take. So and some enumerators see the one photograph, the other ones see the other photograph. So we can see what's the effect of this second photograph on their selection into the job, which is a documentary. And then we also have a bunch of measurements. The mini job applicants, if they are selected, they rate photographs on on SES, or socioeconomic score. No, there's a batch that ranks them on socioeconomic, another batch that ranks them on beauty, a batch that ranks them on corpulence, and a batch that rates them on probabilities of victimization. And there's also a job screening photographs by image. So there's a lot of things going on. So let's talk about the first hypothesis, which is individuals who appear to be lower rank are believed to be victimized. Let's start with that. So this is relying on these vignette type of questions. Yeah, there were different types of vignettes. So this is one vignette. So this is, I don't know if you noticed, but this is there the middle one is the pointer. Oh, it doesn't really work, right? So you can see this is the same person, but in three different types of appearance. The same model, an actor, if you want, we hide, low, middle, high socioeconomic status for Abidjan. And so basically then we ask them questions about, look at this person, is this person likely to be, and then there were all kinds of different vignettes. And so, for instance, this is the kind of answers you get. Is this person more likely to be suspected by the police of burglarizing? If you show this at the high SES picture, you get a large negative effect. What about suspected by the community of stealing? Same thing. Evicted by the landlord? Same thing. Invited to a social gathering, then of course the sign is flipped. Much more likely to be invited to a social gathering. And at the same time, you see that low SES pictures are less likely to be invited and more likely to be evicted. Okay, so these are beliefs or perspectives, if you want, that people have about the effect that your appearance would have on you. This is about, you can break it down by gender. It's essentially very similar by gender. You can also break it down by the welfare side of the respondent. It's also not very different. So these are general beliefs that are shared widely by the population of interest. Okay. Now, does the consumption choice matter? This was basically the way you were dressed when you leave the house. What about consumption? So this is the experiment where you give people this choice between a free meal or like a pen, or there's another, in the vignette is a keychain and a tote bag for coming into the interview. What happens if you people saw? And some people are told the person selected the free meal, and some people are not. So there's variation within the survey population. You see that those that are shown that the job applicant selected the free meal, and this information is available to the employer, they expect like a 40% reduction of their likelihood that they will be invited for it, because they're signaling they're poor. They take the useless thing, which is probably branded by the firm and all that. They're basically signaling that they are richer. And you can see the type of jobs: member of a charity committee, interview for a job at a supermarket, or interview for a job at an NGO. So these are broad spectrum kind of questions. They're not limited to one specific type of thing. And if you look at the magnitude of the effects, which is basically selecting a meal, and you can see the effect of being unemployed, for instance. It doesn't even flip the size of the effect, right? So people really anticipate that these consumption choices have an effect on a consequential effect. This is again shared widely across the sample. It says everybody thinks the same. Okay. And if you benchmark this, so we have another vignette which I won't show you the results, which basically instead of showing them taking the meal or whatever, you show them their education level and things like that. What you find is that basically you saw a 40%. If you measure it in standard deviation, it was not taking the free meal has 0.42 increase in standard deviation of the perceived probability of being invited. And having secondary education as opposed to no education is a 0.5 standard deviation effect. So it's basically the same order of magnitude as having secondary education. But that means people believe that these signals are strong. At least that's what it is. But is this true? And maybe they have wrong, false perception. It doesn't mean that it will not affect their behavior. If this is their perception, it will affect their behavior, right? So that's the main thing to measure. But you still might want to worry about whether this is true. And so this is a situation where people have provided the photographs, and the enumerators are going to be selecting people they think are appropriate for 3 documentaries. Babila Dur, which is about difficulties of life in Abidjan, the Voices of the Poor, basically. Abidjan, Land of Opportunity, which is about, Voices of the Mighty, and is also Babila Joy, which is about having fun. Okay. And what the enumerators see are these photographs. Now, these are not photographs of individuals in the survey. Now, these photographs have also been rated by my mini-job applicants, right? So I have a beauty score, an LCS score, and all that, and you see that people so the enumerators don't see the score; they only see the photograph. But I have scored them on the photograph separately, so I know that this. So if you have a high LCS score, you're much more likely to be assigned by by the enumerator a high score for being on this documentary on Abidjan Land of Opportunity. And then if you are beautiful, they think that you're more into partying. So they basically think that you are more suitable for something about having fun and also being younger. Okay, so that's, as you would expect. Taking stock, people believe that visible signals, such as clothes and consumption choices, affect how they're treated. Does this belief lead to a distortion in their behavior? So now we move to the second part of the paper. In the paper, we have a model in case economists in the room think, well, I need to know that this would be true in a model. And so there's a model where you find that, anyway, I don't have the time to go through the model, but the model basically says that in a world where consumption is a signal, and there's a part of the population that doesn't want to deal with people below a certain income level, and you have to send a signal that you are at least at income level. So the way the signal is constructed is that it imposes a cost on, in terms of appearance, on people, and those who cannot. Of course, there are going to be people who think, wait a minute, this is way too expensive, I can't do that. You set the cost of the signal exactly so that the people who choose not to send the signals are those that the others precisely wanted to exclude. But it means that the cost of the signal increases as you get poorer. This zone where the signal gets more and more costly to you. And so basically, expenditure on the signal is going to behave like a luxury. So because it's going to be very large. Sorry, as a necessity. So it's going to behave like an essential that you absolutely need to consume if you are within that zone. Okay, so that's what the model says. Model predicts. So first we try. Are people willing to pay? Not to pay money, but to pay in terms of time, and they have to be there and so on, to get a second picture taken? The answer is yes. If they are told that the picture will be used for screening people, for selecting people for a documentary, they're much more likely to be It's still a relatively small number of fraction of people who want a second photograph. It's about 17% across the board, but it goes from 17% to 23%. Yeah. And there's the same thing again. It's mostly men, but and mostly the middle of the welfare side that does that. And now you can ask yourself, well, they got a second photograph. First of all, did the right people choose to have a second photograph? So, red line is the people who don't get a second photograph. So, well, this is their SES rating of their photo. Because remember, we have that for everybody who gave a photo. These are the people who choose to have a second photograph. And this is the SES rating of their second photograph. So you can see that they managed to improve. They managed to improve their inferred SES, where this SES is inferred by people in the same population, right? Because the people who were invited to do the mini job of rating photographs are all these households that were part of the survey. And generally, those that didn't submit the photograph. So we don't risk the risk, which they would actually be seeing it their own photograph. So we don't want that. So prepared photo. Usually when you look at the rec, so this is the confirmation of what we just saw in the graph. Does it matter in terms of expected outcomes? Well, if you look at the enumerators were also asked to rate people on their suitability for a job as receptionist at a big hotel, Sofitel, and everybody knows that hotel in Abidjan. Again, for a charity committee, for 2 documentaries, and for invitation to a social gathering. And you can see that the second photograph, these are a much smaller sample, of course, only 230 photographs. But you can see that it's much higher probability of being rated highly, except for those of the poor. You would hope that, right? I mean, and these are actually these are the beliefs, and these are the realized when the enumerator is actually selected. So it's also true for selection for tailored opportunity, which is the one that's really for the richer people. If you have a prepared photo, they're much more likely to be selected to that, and less likely to be assigned to the one that basically talks about the difficulties of life. This is the mini job. This is the sample selection for the mini job. This is the situation where they can either. So now they actually, it's not a vignette anymore. The people are actually selecting either a meal or a pen. It's actually really making that choice for meal. And you can see that those who are told that that choice would be visible to the selection committee are much less likely to take the meal, even though majority of them want the meal. Like 57% of them pick the meal. It's only there for the poor or near poor, which, as we would expect, these are the ones who really need to send the signal. And then we have a raffle. I've already explained what the raffle is. So this is among. So there are 3 controls. There are 3 treatments. One is a private treatment. You make the choice completely privately. They go to the tablet and choose what they want. There's one where they basically tell the enumerator what they want, and there's one where they put their name on a sheet of paper and tick a box where there are all the other names on the paper, so they think, oh my gosh, this decision will be seen by my neighbors. And so for the people who are in the control group, those who are purely private, you can see that this charitable giving just shoots off with income. So that's the. It goes above 50%, 60% of them. Of course, most of the population is here. Right? The summer population is here. The few that have it shoots off. All right. So we see that when we then compare this average consumption of choice of the charitable contribution in the public and in the public enumerator and public neighbor, you can see that these are positive coefficients, and they are significant for the enumerator, which I think was probably more credible than the sheet of paper they may have seen through our little disguise light. So that's possible. And it's not small. I mean, goes okay. So 17.7% in the private is the average, and it goes up by another. It goes up to 21.5%. And then if you look at the very poor people and you compare their behavior in the private and public treatments, you see that some of them give up on the signal. So the really poor people will say, "Oh, I can't do this. This is too expensive." That's only when it's visible, then I have to do it. So that's it. Conclusion: people believe that they can signal the signals of SES are consequential, and they take action to keep up their appearance as a result of that. Thank you.
Take some questions from Marcel.
Thanks. This is Michael Walker, Town Institute Berkeley. This is really interesting. I was curious how you think this might matter for a setting like market prices, where you frequently don't have prices that are posted, but often, you know, the anecdotes that I hear around that is like, oh, if you come in looking too rich, then everyone is going to try to take advantage of you. So I guess the scenarios that you were kind of presenting, it seemed like they all sort of went in one way in terms of how you might want to be presenting yourself. And I was just curious if you had any thoughts or how this model or other things will fall into those types of settings.
Very good question, Michael. The original design that we had for this project was more ambitious and was going to include, you know, we're all going to see, you know, well, if you show too much real standing, maybe at some point you get taxed. Eventually, we decided not to do it for two reasons. One, of course, it was, you know, there's already a lot here, and we wanted to get this nailed down better. But also the main problem really is that we don't have those rich people. They're not in our sample. And also there's already some literature about that, about, you know, this kind of taxing of the rich. But yeah, it was part of the original design. I can show you.
Louis Fox at UC Berkeley. So Marcel, I'm trying to square your experiment with the long literature that says you can ask neighbors to rate who's rich and poor, and then figure out who's deserving of a cash transfer, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, you're saying people don't want their neighbors to know they're poor, but this other literature says neighbors know who's rich and poor. So I'm just wondering how you reconcile those two literatures.
I don't.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Because we actually have another paper with Pascaline and JP where we actually tried to do that. We went to these same communities and we tried to see whether they could rank their neighbors. And apart from the fact that they knew very few of their neighbors, even though we really corral them into small. In fact, they didn't even want to rate people in the same compound. You know what I mean? Compound, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we developed even a new methodology to try to deal with this issue, to see whether we could recover more information than we would do from just basically averaging the ranks. And it still remains very. But if they behave like in this paper, it's not surprising, because they all try to appear, you know, at some minimum level. So you can't can't tell.
So the literature that says these rankings work well comes maybe from rural areas
Yes.
where they know their neighbors, so there may be a
Absolutely.
difference.
Yes,
Maybe what you're saying is there's a difference between urban and rural.
yes,
That's fair.
yes.
There's a recent PNAS paper on that, Fu et al., that looks at the DHS ranking the PEI, Christian scale of community, and one other, which I can't remember right now, but finds very low correlation in most settings. And it's a 3-country study, so you can look at that. So, because I think it also depends if people are like trying, are they trying to look a certain way so that they can be considered for a program or not? But overall, it finds poor correlation because essentially they're measuring poverty different. So,
Yeah, it's Trackman, there's a paper like that, yeah. Yeah, I know.
Do you have any thoughts on whether you expect to get the same kind of tendency towards pooling or imitation or whatever in a production setting, or is this all about consumption? Just thinking about like Regal and Roth stuff where they find that people have information on who's more productive.
Well, I mean, you mean
Which
the,
might be hard to do if everyone's sort of successfully, making themselves look like a productive person. But maybe this is just all about consumption. Production.
I know that in the paper by Bandiera, Rasul, and another co-author about the fruit pickers, that the hyperactivity will slow down to be with their friend. So they basically, they're trying to look the same. But I think the problem there is going to be that it combines what Michael was saying with what we are saying here. So it's going to be very delicate to test it. But you see what I'm trying to say? You're going to be mixing people who are trying to show that they are more productive than they actually are, or at least they have the same income as the others, and people who are trying to pretend that they are less productive than they actually are. So that's going to be potentially difficult. So, but it's a good question. I like the question. Thanks.
No, no, thanks so much. It was really thoughtful kind of experiments. And I guess I don't know if I would do it. Sorry. So I'm Sarah Evans-Lotsko. I'm based at London School of Economics. And yeah, I was wondering, kind of thinking about trends and how this links maybe with some trends in social media where there's such a impetus to manipulate your status online now, and maybe a growing trends around that. And so I guess I was thinking about in relation to that, if there are maybe some general trends towards normalizing that manipulation of social status, both maybe, yeah, I guess how that also, any implications for increased drive to conceal poverty now, and yeah, right, I guess what you think about, yeah, future trends in this area. And then maybe even in terms of looking at that, if there were any age differences in terms of how willing people were to do that.
I think there's a small but probably growing literature on this. The one paper I remember is the one by Matt Gensko and co-authors, where they just basically convince these young, I don't know how young they are, but I think they're probably freshmen or something like that, to not to go on Facebook for 1 month. They pay them for that. And it is true that yeah, there is a lot of psychosocial benefits to that. It seems to be, and of course there's a lot of anecdotal evidence in the press on that of people. It becomes a treadmill, right? So you basically, I remember in England, I really hated that dress code thing. I knew exactly what it was doing. It was basically an anti-war, and I hated it all the time. All these different layers. Just I couldn't.
Welcome to California.
I think we're gonna move on now to the general discussion. Thank you so much, Marcel. Let's continue this as a group, so we're gonna, I think, have
You could sit, I think we'll do it as a full group thing, so you could maybe just sit in the front or
wherever you
yeah, sit, yeah, just in the,
We
yeah.
don't want you guys sitting answering questions like the
or feeling like that.
Yeah, I guess we, kind of, there's something we've done in the past in the community that I think people like, so I think we'd love to hear from the panelists, but also there's just so many people who have worked on topics related to the two talks that were just presented. We have a ton of social psychologists, but also just tons and tons of people doing this kind of work. So I thought it might be, or we thought it might be nice to just have a general discussion. So I'll lead it off with one question, maybe continuing from what I was asking Catherine, but then, I think just open the floor to anything kind of on these talks are just relevant more generally to this domain. So I think Catherine, in your answer to the question I had asked towards the end was just that your view is really this is all construal, that really that's how you see kind of, what's kind of making an impact in the intervention. So I actually would love to hear your and others' view then on whether we should, or do we have evidence that actually then says these more individualistic approaches are not right for these contexts. If it really is just what I called marketing, so I was trying to be a little bit kind of devil's advocate about it. If it really is just marketing, then is there evidence that actually we shouldn't, encourage people to be individualistic, try to kind of build, but do it in a way that doesn't like upset other people, just in the way that you market your actions? So anyone, you, Hazel, if it's, I'm sure many people have an opinion on this. Yeah.
I first want to say I thought both those papers were great. I love them. I would say that.
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hazel Marcus, I'm a social psychologist at Stanford, collaborator with Catherine. So I would say that there's let me just talk about in the US with respect to first generation students who have come from environments where interdependence is much more practiced and familiar to them, and when they enter into the universities like our own, even though they have scored well and grades are at the same level in order to be admitted, first generation students everywhere do very poorly in the first couple of years. Their grades are bad, they drop out, they don't get good grades. A variety of problems suggest that they're in trouble. There's no reason given how they entered. And what we see is that universities are schools for independence. They're built on white middle class norms as the ways of doing things, in which there's a lot of focus on being unique and standing out, expressing yourself, raising your hand, saying what your opinions are, those kinds of things that have been well socialized at home. A lot of emphasis on competition, because that's how they get to our kinds of schools, by beating out other people. And students who come, Latinx students, there's certainly lots of Southeast Asian students, to be sure, often many African American students, depending on where they've grown up, they're just not, we haven't been prepared for our very independent environments, and they suffer at first. They can, of course, learn the rules of the game once you tell them the rules of the game, but it takes a while to catch up. So there's many studies in education on this first generation, continuing generation, where first generation, no one in your family has been to college. Continuing means you're coming where you and many generations back, or at least one generation back, have gone to college. So that would be one evidence I would get from that.
And then the other thing that I want to say is that I think we think of the construal as the entry point for behaviors. So to the extent that something stays in your head and does not translate into changed approaches, behavioral approaches out in the real world, we don't think it would stick and translate to long-term effects. So I think there's maybe a false dichotomy. It's not just marketing, it's not just construal of a certain opportunity that you then take up or you don't. Is then you change your entire approach to how you, for instance, entrepreneurship unfolds over time. So if you shift towards a more interdependent view of entrepreneurship, then you may engage in more relational processes. And I guess I ended on the point of this being operational in this context, meaning showing negotiated
having an interdependent approach to entrepreneurship, where you engage in negotiated agency and you talk to other people in your household, and you get them on board with you doing entrepreneurship, maybe you engage them in entrepreneurship. The more that these subjective construals translate into relational outcomes, changes in people's behavior and interactions, the more they will have long-term effects. But Hazel's other work, how much she's describing, she finds that there are differences in immediate effects of like cognitive measures, for instance, on their performance immediately. So it's both. Yeah.
If you tell them, students, tested this in lab experiments, if you tell the first generation students that they're going to do a series of tasks, and before that they read a letter, very interdependent place where you can work collaboratively with other students. You have lots of opportunity for that. At Stanford's a place that encourages you and your family to hear a lot of interdependent messages in the letter compared to the letter that usually goes out from Stanford about why we're so glad you're the best place in the world, we're the smartest people who are going to teach the world. You know, that Berkeley has the same letter. But if you frame it with one letter or another, you can see that the first generation students immediately do better on a whole variety of tasks once they feel like this is a place where they can bring their more interdependent self or can be operational in Catherine's terms. So yes, I would say though, just to make a little argument here, in terms of construal bothers me because it does sound like it's just in my head, and I think that's not right. It has to be reflected in my behavior. So then, as you're saying, it's reflected in how people respond to you, and then that should be how the environment changes to support that to the rest of the people. So it starts maybe with the construal, but I think the way we think about construal is very individualistic. So maybe that's a problem.
Other people want to respond or ask something different?
So I have two thoughts about your study, Catherine. The first one is immediately the gender angle popped out at me. So if you look at what is similar across the U.S. and Africa, it's attitudes about what can cause problems, tension for women in business, tensions in the household, and also both of them like women to be peaceable. So there was a certain similarity there in the gender roles, despite your comment that there's more difference about the differences between and among. But the second thing I would say is that so 15 years ago, I did a big study where I wandered all over Africa interviewing people who had these kinds of household businesses. And one thing that was universal in the 6 countries where I did focus groups and surveys and interviews was that all the men said they were not willing to tell their wife how much they made, and they hid their income, and all the women said they hid their income from their husband and they didn't want them to know. So I thought it was quite interesting that your picture showed collaboration with other women. There were a few pictures where the woman was, sharing the income with her husband, but that was not my experience of what really happened. So I just wondered your thoughts about that aspect of interdependence and other people's thoughts who work with this population about that aspect of interdependence.
It's a myth, it's a myth. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to dig into the question. It sounds like there are some universally beneficial things to entrepreneurship or pursuing your own journey in life that we agree on. Or it sounds like that, and the way you support people to do that is very culturally dependent. I'm curious, in a world where time and resources and intervention space is limited, what are some of the priorities for psychosocial interventions, or how did you land on the ones you included in that arm?
Also, wanted to clarify that what I was actually testing in one of the arms of personal initiative is an intervention that's being tested, for instance, at Togo with entrepreneurs. It's not that it's not being tested in more collectivistic context, it's just being tested with entrepreneurial types within those You could say.
Yeah.
in general. And so they kind of latch on to that personal initiative training and it works for them. The distinction I'm drawing is also for women who might not be entrepreneurial. And so I think that a big gap in the literature on life skills to date is that they're not focusing on ultra core non-entrepreneurial types who have about, homogeneous and everyone thinking that microfinance is going to be the thing that everybody's secretly entrepreneurial. Turns out to not be true. And probably particularly so for women in extreme poverty and rural areas. So the reason I was kind of choosing those two types of agency was because I wanted to see if this was less likely to work for people who are operating under these circumstances. And then why agency and aspirations. I think there's been a lot of focus on self-determined. Is that you're saying?
Yeah, like how do we, if like agency seems like it's buoyed by self-efficacy, self-regulation, all these things.
Mhm.
Is that decided? Are we like all in agreement? That's what helps agency here. And it's just how to culturally introduce it. Like I don't know.
I think, well, actually also just if we question earlier about like it should be mindsets within the head or something outside the head. Hazel does work. She does work on showing that behavior is less determined by mindsets and norms in more collectivistic contexts. And so that makes me think that if we stick with agency only in the head, where we just try to kind of budget differences of self-esteem, will be quite limited for self-esteem or self-confidence. And so we need to really start thinking about expanded moral leadership and thinking about people's social affordances. So we use social psychology to think a lot about the social context in which people operate and whether they're allowed to enact agency. So you can build women's self-confidence, their skills all you want, but if they live in a place with really pagan norms that constrains their behaviors to certain threats, that make behaviors, and that those trainings only go so far. So I think that we should be focusing both on the normative environment, social environment, as well as okay.
Since you raised it, I was going to ask the question, but you introduced it here, which is the question of heterogeneity within populations. So in the context where there's some have sort of an inclination towards entrepreneurship and some don't, and so your setting is sort of one extreme. It's like on a far end where it's very homogeneous, it's very isolated, very low. So in more complex settings, and I presume that these inclinations, the independent, are they sort of coexist in the heart and minds of people in many places. And so in that sense, we should be thinking of these sorts of framings. They're sort of they activate something that's sort of within people and within their relationships. And it activates sort of more or less depending on how deeply rooted that is in the way they function. So and I'm just curious, so in your setting, there's probably not much scope for kind of heterogeneous effects of the framing because there's just not a lot of heterogeneity. But so how would you think of, if we're thinking in other settings, in urban, peri-urban settings, or it seems like then it is really more like you're selecting subgroups by the way that you pitch it, which is kind of, I think, what you started to hint at. Is that right?
That's why I'm not urban.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I piggyback off of that? And maybe there's a lot of graduate students in the audience, and I think a lot of, I think when one sees these kinds of interventions, and we have many examples of like these really amazing impacts with very high cost effectiveness. I think but we also have many papers that don't have impacts and have null results. And I think it would be really useful from those of you who have had interventions like these that have worked, or have ones that have not worked. What are some practical lessons for individuals who want to go to a setting and design a psychosocial intervention to impact people, whether it's a goal setting one or a role model one or something? I mean, both just what are just kind of practical things. This is how one should start. This is how one should figure out what are the culturally relevant themes that would be appropriate or so on. I think that advice would be really valuable for me, at least.
Bruce Whiting from USF. So one of the things that I think we've learned a little bit in doing aspirations treatments is just this idea that there are internal constraints and external constraints, and that you would never want to raise aspirations past what the binding external constraint, right? So, but in a lot of cases, the external constraint has been released, like through microcredit or something, but then the internal constraint is still there. So you'd want to expand agency up to that point, or try to, and within the social context, but not past, right? It probably wouldn't even be ethical to do that.
Your thoughts? I really like Marcel speaking about keeping up appearances. I have English family, so I know all about, what, it's always about the neighbors, what you're doing, it's what would they think. And what goes along with that is something you're talking about, which is you want to be very careful as to not try and rise above your station. That's the worst possible thing, is that you're trying to be someone that you're not. My mother's worst criticism was always, he'd be something if he could. And I would say, Mom, this is America. We'd all be someone if we could, but in most of the world, you need to know your place in the overall social context, the hierarchy. So, there's certainly room to move, as you're suggesting, but then your behavior is socially co-regulated by others. And I would think the best example of it is the natural experiment of COVID. If you look in East Asia and why the countries of Taiwan, Korea, Japan did so much better than the US is because this kind of co-regulation, not self-regulation of behavior, not, gee, I'm not gonna wear my mask no matter, me, I'm not gonna be constrained in that way. That's something the Japanese wouldn't go out without your mask, regardless of what you thought, because that would be being a bad person, not respecting others. It was so powerful. And I think this sort of general idea that Americans, especially middle class Americans, white Americans, forget because we're so marketized. We have these kinds of selves where we have our preferences and our goals, and what we should do is express them. It's not that we ignore other people, but they don't have that same momentary, daily impact on our behavior. That's Southwest, I would say.
Just very practical.
I'm just wondering about the limits of psychosocial interventions. I was born and raised in China, moved here a long time ago. If you prime the interconnectedness culture or with family and friends, in me, it will backfire for me, because there's a lot of burdens and pressure from family and social networks that I do not want to carry. And I appreciate the independence in North America where I can make my own decisions. So that's one factor. I wonder if this has ever backfired in your research. And second, we did the same kind of self-affirmation, goal setting, plan making interventions with homeless people in Vancouver. Didn't work at all. There are many reasons for that. One is the external barrier, the lack of cash, the lack of money, is really the determining factor. It's just like, doesn't matter how much you affirm them or provide psychosocial support, it won't make a difference for them if they don't have money to move out of the street. We do have a few cases. This is like 2 out of 50 people who stayed in the shelter by choice because of the interconnected relationships they had. They gave all the money away. They gave close to $8,000 away to their friends and family. They chose to stay homeless because that was their social community. That was a fraction of the people, of course, but those individuals do exist. So I'm just curious about, the backfiring, the negative aspects of interconnection, and any kind of limits that you've seen with the intervention.
And maybe I'll do one thing as because I don't want to break up the discussion. We are supposed to be in a break right now, so if anyone wants to use the bathroom or like step outside for a few minutes, feel free to. Those who want to stay and continue the conversation, maybe you can listen, and then we'll start the next session, at 4. Yeah, fantastic.
I haven't seen that yet, but I am testing that very explicitly right now. Because I think it's a very split population. It has, it's very balanced in terms of independence and narcissism, and a lot of people say that exact thing. So they can't pursue their own goals because they're reacted by others. So we're seeing it view insights from the other, what are the effects for individuals, but also what are the effects for the collective.
You'll test it with urban, rural migrants. Could test it. You could test it with rural to urban migrants. That's exactly where you could test it. Because we have research that they try to reduce the ties after a while if they start making money. That's what it's called impact.
Any other questions? Marcel?